Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. That is the same thing that you could do last week, but now you can also do this. This is Airwindows VerbThic. So it might not be super obvious what that was about. It's a very similar reverb. In fact, I'm showing it to you now, and that's right next to VerbTiny. So what's the difference between these if they look so much the same? The difference is I've used a different kind of reverb algorithm inside it, and where for VerbTiny I try to produce the most distant kind of sound out of the reverb. Well, VerbThic is a little different. VerbThic is designed so that the reverb tries to come forward rather than falling backwards. So it sounds like this. And it was specifically chosen so that rather than falling backwards into what sounds like ambience, it kind of comes forward at you. There's a reason for this, besides just trying it to see what it does. And granted, it doesn't sound very natural on drums, because it's sort of, without falling backwards into the far distance, it doesn't sound like reverb anymore. By comparison, if we did the real reverb again, it does tend to sound like it's going farther away. But this is really for a different purpose. And it's not just making a sort of weird gated reverb thing, although you can if you like. In fact, this follows the same rules, such as this is the normal reverb quality. There's dual mono. And then here is your hyper wide sound out of it. And you can see that that is still a fairly normal behavior. But what would happen if we tried fooling with, for instance, don't mind me, I should really tighten that up a bit. This is a fake string. It's a Proteus, and it is a classic old kind of rompler thing. So this is the kind of thing where if you're dealing with this, that might not be enough all by itself. And so you can put reverb in, of course. And we can have a fairly stereo reverb. It could be a little bit tighter in sound. And the reverb helps a little bit. But if it is realistic, well, it's not going to be dominating things too much. But then if we turn off the VerbTiny and we turn on VerbThic, all of a sudden that's a lot bigger and wider, because it's causing a reverb-like sound, but it's not designed to fall back into the distance. Instead, it's designed to come forwards and blend. So we can do this. Here's your dry. Here's your wet. It's kind of loud. Or we can do the dual mono, or a combination of dual mono and hyper wide. start out with something like this, end up with something like this. There's an extra thing to this, which is that I decided, in order to make it thicken up and come forward even more effectively, I've got a little bit of a saturation on this. And in so doing, I ended up redesigning my saturations and doing one on the basic theme of how I made tape-hack. But instead of doing tape-hack, which is designed to produce a particular behavior, in this case, I was just taking all of the parameters you use to make a fake sine effect, but they were following my rules for the purest or shifting of bits calculations, which produces an unnatural effect. But it's very upfront and it's very big, like this. So I can dial it in like that. You don't need as much wet maybe because it is such a rich sound. Or maybe we do mostly hyper wide. What shall we do? We'll also add the reverb at the same time. It's going VerbThic into VerbTiny, and here's what you get. And it'll work just as well on a fake B3. Here it is without the thickener, but we can put it back on. Or we could even do it on an Ovation Summit. And again, just raw. It's like this. Then add VerbThic, which does not have a lot of replace on. We can throw a little on maybe. And it turns it into a very upfront but very thick texture. And then we can turn on VerbTiny, because this is all upfront sounds. This is all sounds in the mix that are not deep reverb. It's just adding a lot of blurring and thickening through VerbThic. But none of it's really deep background. Deep background is achieved through VerbTiny. And in so doing, we can put as much replace in these as we want, knowing that they're going to do two separate planes of fullness and space. VerbThic is giving upfront fullness, and then VerbTiny is giving deep space, as we hear when we turn VerbThic off. We've got the deep reverb, but we don't have the upfront. Put VerbThic on, we have the upfront, but we don't have the deep background. And then we can have both. there you have it. So I probably don't need to go into a lot of extra detail as far as what it does, because it works exactly the same as VerbTiny from last week, with one small difference, which also applies to VerbTiny, in that as I was developing it, I worked out some ways of improving the CPU efficiency of it, which are finding their way into a lot of different reverbs. And it's through not having to keep around as many of the, I guess you call them temporary variables. I was doing a whole version where I made lots of temporary variables just to keep track of what was doing what. But it turns out you can just keep reusing those and move on. And that makes the whole plugin like 20 kilobytes smaller, which for these is amazing because these are not large plugins. But it should also improve CPU efficiency, because if it has to keep a bunch of variables around, that's going to take up more memory. It's going to slow everything down. But if it gets to use the CPU more efficiently by reusing variables, well, that should make everything run better. Which is not to say that VerbThic runs better than VerbTiny, where I hadn't done this yet, because I went back and did VerbTiny over. So if you would like that to run slightly better, re-download it. It doesn't change anything about the sound. It only changes what it does with temporary variables. So there was no reason I couldn't just update it in place. And your existing one will work just fine. No problem there. But if you'd like to get a slight boost in performance, either download one of the big collections. Sometimes I run into people who aren't really up to speed with what I do here and are going to the page in airwindows.com and downloading something old. I think Macady is a very classic example of this, which I originally did before I had Apple Silicon porting done. And so they'll download the old plugin, and it'll only have a retro component file or a retro Mac VST file. So what you got to do is download the DMG file like you currently get with current releases, but you can also download the big collections, which has all of the plugins. It's not that some of the plugins aren't supported. It's that if you go to the plugin release page, you get it as it came out. And you download the collection and you get all of the most recent versions and compilations of it that'll run on everything. So yeah, I hope you enjoy VerbThic. I'm going to try to rush off, and I am making a video game, and I'm having some fun with that. That's been some of my recent live streams, is fooling around with that. That's probably going to come out on Steam, but for very cheaply. I want to see whether I can help pay off my car by making a cool video game that's really cheap but is fun to play with. And maybe if there is a threshold that it passes or it earns a certain amount, then I'll open source it or whatever. But I might as well have fun with this while I can. Plugins are always free for everybody, no exceptions. And VerbTiny and VerbThic are just like they're also MIT licensed open source. So you get to build them into your own stuff if you want. You just have to credit. And I'll be here again next week with another audio plugin. That's what I do. I'm here every week. So they're not always an immediate follow-up of a plugin with another plugin that's almost exactly like it, except for I think I did demonstrate that that is not exactly like it, that it has a completely different feel because it's in a different sort of depth plane. But I will be back next week because I'm here every week. I hope you enjoy all the plugins. If you're impressed with that, then go and look at all the other plugins I put out, because there have been lots of them. And this week for my special extra fancy Patreon supporters, because I do something special for people who are over $10 a month on Patreon. Like, I'm a big fancy man who wants to get paid lots of money. But since all the plugins are always free, that is going to be, maybe the video game, you get a special download code for that. I just make more examples of audio run through Airwindows Meter. And as it happens, I have ended up being persistent with that and making a whole bunch of those. So that's going to be a ever-increasing number of video examples of what various songs sound like run through Meter. And I always pick them out so that they will look like, so you'll learn something about what a classic piece of music actually measures like when you look at it in Meter. And this week it's the Beastie Boys, because I'm on the home stretch towards doing Console H for hip hop. And so I thought you might want to hear what Sure Shot looks like in Airwindows Meter. And you might be surprised at how closely it tracks to measuring exactly the same as all the other hit records that I've measured in Airwindows Meter, and how well it performs, and what that stuff looks like. Even though it's a completely different genre, I've done like Debbie Boone, You Light Up My Life. Still, Sure Shot shows up with the same kind of behaviors that I've tentatively identified as hit record type sounds. And if you can measure it and observe it, then you can replicate it. And with that, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.